I don't know if you can see my hair blowing about a bit, but the wind has blown us to Ballindalloch, Scotland, home of Glenfarclas. Now, Glenfarclas was founded in 1836, but rumor has it, as is commonplace, they were cheating and distilling long before that on this farm. Now, we are on a historic farm that has slowly expanded into a distillery with a modern visitor center, but I am looking out at historic stone buildings and a wonderful view here in Ballindalloch, Scotland, home of Glenfarclas, the sherry whiskey kings of Scotland, my opinion. We're going to move inside, see if they're ready for us, and hopefully they'll show us about and maybe give us a wee taste too. You must be Deborah.
I am. Lovely
Colin.
to meet you.
Yeah, from
Thank
Try
you for
Before
coming
We
to see
Die.
us.
Yeah. Thanks so much for making time for us here at Glenfarclas.
Absolute pleasure.
Right. So, you know, I've seen some of the other buildings, and you said to meet you in the malt house? Is this
The mill
where-
room.
The mill room.
The mill room, yes.
All right. And so I see this pretty not modern machine right next to me here. So, and it says the malt mill. But what is this?
Well, what I will say first is that here at Glenfarclas, not many of the things you see will be particularly modern.
Okay.
But we're not fully old-fashioned either, but we'll come to that as we go around. The malt mill was installed here in the 1970s.
Okay.
So basically, at that time, there was a bit of an expansion happening here. There was a lot of changes happened. We stopped malting our own barley. We built our visitor centre and we expanded our distillery within about 5 years of each other. At that time, they realised the malt mill was not going to give us the capacity we needed. So we went a little bit further afield and found this beauty in Switzerland. So the company that made it is called Buller, and it's a very efficient mill. It will mill 8 tons per hour. Now, luckily for us, it's not running right now, or even this close, you would not hear what I'm telling you.
Right. I feel like I saw somewhere on the way in a bucket full of earplugs.
Yes.
Right.
Not that we really bother with these things, but they're there if you want them.
Yeah, the insurance company requires
Exactly.
it. Yes. So this is just great. It feels like what a task this must have been just to get this in this space.
Not as bad as the stills, but we'll
Okay.
come to those later too.
Okay. So, you know, I see this chute coming down into it, right? So I don't see any other way that the malt is getting in here, right? So it must be coming from above?
Exactly. So the malted barley will come down that chute, but there are a few little things that happen first. So
Yep.
we can take a look at those if you want.
All right, I'd love to go upstairs and see what's above this chute.
Absolutely.
All right, perfect. So we're still with Deborah here at Glenfarclas in the upper mill room. Do I have
Exactly,
that right?
absolutely.
And so this would be above the mill we saw downstairs.
Exactly, we're right above it.
So I see the malt destoner, but I see more chutes coming from above, and I see things happening all around. So can you walk me through this room a little bit?
Of course. So basically, while the malted barley gets delivered to us from the maltsters, it should be perfect. It doesn't mean it's completely there. So there's
Right.
a couple of little things we're going to do before we mill it, just to make sure it's completely clean.
Mm-hmm.
So the first thing is the dresser behind us here.
This is brand new.
It's absolutely shiny, yeah. The wheel in there spins around and it will kick out anything bigger than the malted barley.
Okay.
From the dresser, it then comes down this arm here over our heads, and just above where you're pointing, there is a piece of wood bolted into it. Now, there are magnets sticking out from there. The magnets will pick up any metal, so no metal can come to the mill. And then...
So if there were some metal shavings in the truck delivering
it will be
or-
shavings. I mean, I've seen them take the magnets out. It's literally tiny shavings,
Okay.
but they can be there. From the trucks, from our own system, or from the production of the malted barley. But obviously the last thing we want is metal or stones, which is the third part, to touch the mill, because the mill actually, there is a high risk of dust explosion.
So that's the destoner. So
Yes.
I wondered what this was, right?
Yes,
so we have
exactly.
this bucket of pebbles, really.
Yeah, small stones, small pebbles.
Right.
The destoner works very simply. You can actually give it a good shake, literally. The whole thing vibrates, but the stones will work their way to the back, just using gravity, and then the malted barley will then fall down through the chutes there underneath us, and then through the mill.
So in some ways, the way they will sometimes pan for gold, right?
Similar, yeah, absolutely.
Shifting the weights. Now, this isn't for tourists. These are actual
These are real. They all
that
came
have
out of
come
there.
out of this machine.
It takes a long time, though.
Right.
I mean, that's probably a couple of years worth, I guess. It's not something we get so much of, but there will be a couple from each batch almost.
But I could imagine that if some of this got through to downstairs, it could be a disaster.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Especially, as you mentioned, because the mill is so powerful,
Right.
if it's going to be working full speed, 8 tons an hour, the rollers are made of metal, stone hits them, the dust explodes.
Wow. Well, let's just, we've got some wood here, knock wood.
There is always real wood at Glenfarclas.
Yes, that's great. Well, so as I sit here in the upper mill room learning about the magnets and the gold machine, right? Because ultimately we're producing some gold here.
I mean, liquid gold, sure.
Yes, I see right in front of me the mash house.
Yep.
I'm wondering if we could move into there.
Absolutely, yes. Let's
All right,
go.
great. Deborah, so I think we've made it into the tun room?
The tun room and the mash house, yeah.
And the mash house, right? And there's just so much happening in here. I have a lot of questions, but really what I want to start with is Glenfarclas. The red, everywhere I turn, right? The stone houses, red doors. So much of the metal infrastructure on this place is red. What's going on with red?
So we maybe don't have the most elaborate marketing department here. However, red is very much our color that we use for everything. Now, the reason for that goes back quite a long way. So in fact, 70 years this year when I think about it. So John Grant's father, George Grant, when he was asked in 1954 by his staff, they said, "Mr. Grant, we need to paint the warehouse doors. Which color would you like us to buy?" And he gave a typically Scottish answer.
The cheapest?
The cheapest. Now, why exactly in 1954 red cost less than anything else? I don't know, but it did. So they were red, and they've basically been red more or less ever since. And that was then adopted almost as the brand color. So the logo, you almost always see it in red. We wear red jackets and all that kind of thing as well. Obviously, a lot of the ironwork is painted red as well.
All right. Well, it really does identify the brand.
Yeah.
Right. And you bring up this other thing that we haven't explored too much, both on or off camera, but truly a family-owned distillery.
Very much so, yes.
Right. So no corporate oversight.
Thank goodness for that.
Right. And so there is a top of the pile that can say, no, left, not right.
Yes.
And that's the end of the conversation.
And that is the end of the conversation, believe me. You do realise quite quickly that you choose your moments to ask certain things.
Yeah.
Because, yes, the chairman of the company, John Grant, he's the 5th generation of his family to own the distillery. And he is very much still day-to-day in charge of what happens here. Maybe not quite so much the production side. He does rely on Colin, the production manager, for a lot of that, but anything else, it's very much still his decisions.
Right, so he's caring for a brand, he's caring for people's livelihoods, right? People work here.
And a family legacy.
And a legacy.
Absolutely,
right?
yeah. And he takes that very seriously.
And takes it very seriously, right. That's nice to see, because especially 5 generations later, sometimes legacies will peter out, right? And the next generation may not show interest.
And I can also reassure you that there have been many offers to buy Glenfarclas, as I'm sure you can imagine, and all very politely rebuked. No, we're not interested.
Maybe
you.
sometimes the shake the head yes, but no.
No. I mean, there was even a blank check offered at one point, but...
Right, because, how could you give this up?
But also, how do you put a value on this?
Right,
is the other
history,
thing. You've got the heritage, the history, the location, the buildings, but also the stock and the name. So these are the 2 things which are very hard to put a value on. As we'll get to see when we go to the warehouse, there are some really nice old casks in there.
And just imagine the ancestors turning in the grave, right, if a decision was made.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I often wonder what they would think.
Yeah.
So it's not a complicated family tree. It goes John, George, George, John. So if you were to go back to the previous John, so we're talking 1865, what would he think if he could see what's here now? I
would imagine he would probably be okay. Right.
Although he wasn't a distiller, he was a farmer.
Right.
This distilling was very much a side hustle in those days.
Okay. But still a little bit of gold in the pocket.
Absolutely,
right?
yes. Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Well, thanks for that. So we're in the ton
ton
room
room.
in the mash house.
Absolutely, yes.
Right. So what happens in here?
So from the mill, which we saw just before,
Yeah.
what comes out of the mill we call grist. It's the milled malted barley. It goes into the mash tun, gets mixed with hot water, and because it's been through the malting process already, so the malting process, the reason why we malt barley to use it for our production is because malting wakes up the enzyme in the barley, which is going to turn the starches into sugars. And the mash tun completes that transformation and dissolves that sugar as well. So what comes from the mash tun is a really sweet barley sugar liquid.
Yeah.
And that liquid is called wort, and that goes into the tun room, so into these washbacks behind us, and yeast is added. Yeast and sugar react to make alcohol.
Right. And though the folks on camera can't see this, right, the mash tun is so much bigger than here, right?
It is,
so
yeah.
is there some volume things happening?
Yeah, so the mash tun is one of the biggest in the industry. So it takes 16 tons of grist at a time, but it's also a slow mash. So it takes 12 hours to do a mash. You can go to other distilleries where they have smaller mash tuns that take 4 hours. So it's always a question of that choice. But here, traditionally, it's been the bigger mash tun. But because the mash tun is so big, we will fill 2 of these washbacks from each mash. So it's constantly filling 2 simultaneously.
So I see that we have wooden tops here,
Yes.
right? And they clearly have seen some heat.
Not heat in the sense that it gets particularly hot. It does warm up, but it's more, it's the alcohol as well. So everything around here that has a black tinge to it, it's usually where the alcohol meets a solid surface.
Okay. All right. So are these ever needing to be replaced? Or?
Those can be replaced quite easily, a lot more easily than the actual washbacks themselves.
Right.
They do take quite a bit of abuse because obviously they're being opened and closed and manoeuvred and so on. So yeah, they get a bit of repair and a bit of replacement when required.
All right. So I did take a peek off camera down in, and I see there are ladders going to the bottom of these. Is that so somebody can climb in and clean?
It's not something that happens every time, but will happen when we do full shutdowns.
All right. All right. So from here, everything is then moving to because here we're sort of in the beer.
Exactly right. So the wash will be maybe 9% alcohol by volume. It's going to be thick and heavy, and that is what's then going to move on to distillation.
And so then we'd be going to the still room next,
Absolutely.
the still house next.
Yes.
I'm really excited to see that because I think that's going to be that classic look everybody
And I have to be honest and say ours is one of the prettier, even if I'm not at all biased.
All right. Well, great. Well, why don't we head over there?
Absolutely.
Well, Deborah, I think this scene is such a classic distillery scene.
Absolutely.
Right? I mean, this is the still room?
Absolutely, yeah. Or still
right.
house, yeah.
Yeah, the still house, right? And so I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 stills?
6.
6?
6, yeah.
I'm missing one.
It's camouflaged.
So what actually happens in the still house?
So each of the stills, there are 3 larger stills and 3 smaller stills. The larger stills, called the wash stills, are used for the first distillation. The smaller stills, the spirit stills, for the second distillation. So Glenfarclas is a typical single malt from Scotland in that it's a standard 2 distillation whisky. What's fun about these stills is they're still direct fired, which is very uncommon. So most distilleries have moved on to the internal steam system, the more modern way of doing things. The story here goes that in the early 80s, when the industry was starting to move towards that, they came along and they asked Mr. Grant if he would like to do the same thing. And he said, okay, yep, 1. So they changed it over. He tried the spirit and he said, no. So he felt like the mouthfeel, the character, the body changed completely by changing where the heat came from.
Yep.
So there was a change at that time. They changed away from coal, because this is the whole reason for this. The industry was moving away from coal-fired stills, but we moved to gas rather than changing to internal steam. So these are all still gas-fired. Now, that means there are 6 large gas burners burning in here when we're in production.
Underneath each one of these stills, there is a flame.
Exactly, yeah.
Right.
And so when it goes into the wash still and the flame heats it up, obviously alcohol boils before water does, so the vapors rise up through the still, out and through the condensers, turned back to liquid, and then by this point they're going to be like 25% ABV.
Right, after the
First distillation,
yes.
Exactly. And then they go back around again into the second distillation, which is exactly the same, except as it flows through the spirit safe right beside us here, the stillman's job is to keep a close eye using the samples here on what's coming through. So using the figures from this.
This is in use.
Absolutely still in use, yeah, absolutely. It's still done manually here.
Yeah.
Some of our friends may have gone to automation, but we don't trust computers. We do use them. I'm not going to say that everything is completely old-fashioned, but this part is still done manually. So the stillman makes a call as to when to cut to select the spirit.
Yeah.
First part coming through is going to be going to one side, and then you literally turn the handle, spirit runs through the middle and is collected in the tank just through the window behind us.
Can I?
And then back it goes once you've collected all the spirit. It's as simple as that. And this looks really high tech, but all it's doing is deciding which tank it's going into from here. Is it spirit or is it going back round for another distillation?
So is somebody just standing here with a clipboard and making a decision? And
They don't have to stay here all the time, but yes, to an extent. So they hide in their little office behind there, which has air conditioning. It's the only place in Scotland that does, but it's very, very hot in here when we're in production. But they know from timings, so they know when to come and look. They know that after maybe the first hour of distillation, they should come and check.
Start to pay attention.
Exactly that, yes.
So how old are the stills in this room?
Two of them are quite new. So in fact, this one just behind me and the one behind there were replaced 2 summers ago. So they are quite new. Generally speaking, stills will have a lifespan between 20 and 25 years.
What would contribute to a still failing or needing to be replaced?
Thickness of the copper.
So the copper is wearing away the whole time from the contact with the spirit.
And also, in our case, with the fires. So our stills, compared to one where they're not direct fired, will usually be a bit thicker in copper, but will also have more wear on them because of those fires. Something else they have to have is a rummager. Now, the rummager sits inside the wash still, and it's a copper chain which moves throughout the whole of the first distillation, because the wash, the liquid from fermentation, is thick, it's heavy, still contains all the yeast, and the yeast will sink to the bottom and burn.
So the rummager is sort of keeping the bottom.
Exactly right.
Preventing a burn.
Preventing it from burning on, exactly. And our beautiful water wheel outside, that's what the rummager, that was to turn the rummager originally.
So that water wheel
1896.
Was the energy source for the rummager.
Exactly, 100 years ago, 120 years ago. Nowadays, it's just a motor.
Yep. Wow. So this is where the Glenfarclas really begins.
This is the magic place, absolutely.
Right.
And these are larger stills, there's no question. These are some of the biggest stills you'll find in Scotland, but it just means that we take a longer time in our distillation.
And so when the spirit leaves here, it's moving to the location to be barreled.
Exactly. And it's going to be around 68% after the second distillation.
Yeah. How high?
68.
68,
yes.
Yep. Okay, so we've talked about that on the show before, that between 60 and 70% is often what
it will go down lower than that, but the average is 68.
Yeah. Wow, that's fantastic. So I think next would be to move over and take a look at the barrels in the warehouse.
Exactly that. So the spirit's going straight into the cask.
Really excited about that. Well, Deborah, I think we've made it to warehouse 1 here.
Or heaven.
Or heaven,
We also call it heaven.
Right. I was thinking I might just bring a cot in, and if you don't mind.
I mean, you wouldn't be the first person to ask that question.
I wish that aroma translated through the camera.
Scratch and sniff.
Right.
We need to do scratch and sniff.
Yeah, it is lovely in here. So this is the first warehouse? Was that what that would mean?
Yeah.
All right. Do you know when this was built?
It was around the 1880s.
Okay.
So the walls and so on are very much from that time, as you can see. Even a lot of the roof is. There's a few little quirks of the roof. Underneath the sign there, the line that runs underneath it is from the railway line that was being built around the same time as this warehouse was. Again, how did it end up here? Mysterious. And then the lead strips that come down the roof were because they weren't allowed to potentially be able to come in through the roof to steal whiskey.
Ah, so it was a preventative.
Preventative. It's not a requirement anymore, but it was a requirement when this warehouse was built.
All right. So it's just lovely. So I'm drawn to these 2 wooden rails, right? And certainly not train track, right?
Very small train.
Right, just a narrow gauge.
Yeah.
So am I correct in understanding, because of the bow of a barrel, the center of the barrel, and this would be for rolling?
Exactly, which makes it so much easier. I don't know have you ever tried to roll a cask?
I have rolled a barrel before,
not easy,
a full
right?
barrel, not a full barrel.
Even harder when they're full because they're so much heavier.
Yeah.
But trying to get them in a straight line, they tend to have a mind of their own unless you're very, very good at it.
Yeah. So, so it seems so clear that we have different size.
Yeah.
Now, my understanding would be that these would be sherry butts.
Exactly,
and
yeah.
this size would be a hogshead?
No, those are actually quarter casks.
Quarter casks.
These ones on this side are hogsheads.
This is a hogshead.
Yeah.
Okay.
But the hogsheads and the butts are the ones we use primarily. Those are just for fun. So I would say about 99% of the casks on site are either hogsheads or butts.
Yeah.
And there's a few other things that our chairman, John, his father bought just for fun. And those quarter casks are one of them.
Okay. So I see now, is this a dunnage warehouse?
It is, yeah. So the walls are very thick. You can kind of feel the humidity. And what that does is it stops the whiskey from warming up or cooling down too much as the seasons change outside. We have a natural floor underneath the layer of stones because we do take a few visitors through here. So underneath this is a layer of sand, and the other warehouses on site are all like this, but with just the sand.
So in a dunnage warehouse, it's generally 3 barrels high.
Exactly, yeah.
So I see there's enough room. Why not just do 3 sherry butts high?
It's all to do with weight. So one of these, when it's full, weighs about half a ton. So
it feels solid.
It
right
is
now.
absolutely solid, and the power and the strength and everything, because they go up here manually, would be
couple of
dangerous.
chaps are just picking this up.
Well, rolling it. They have ramps.
Okay.
So they roll it up the ramps onto the lines. And then the other fun little idiosyncrasy, shall we say, of this is to get them all facing up the way, bung up. There's a little bit of technique involved.
And the bung being the
Yes,
fill point
exactly.
and the exit
has to
point.
face up the way.
Yeah.
So you start at one end, and then the second cask goes on. You start it at 20 past the hour, and the third cask at 22 the hour. And then when you roll them on, they'll all be straight up.
Okay, all right, right. There's an art to
There's
all
absolutely
of
an art
this.
to it. It looks so simple, but there's an art to it for sure.
So for weight and safety purposes,
Yes.
only 2 butts high, and then
Something
the third,
else.
something
or
else.
3 hogsheads is no problem, like
All
you
right,
can see here.
and 3 hogsheads, as we can see around me. All right, so it's interesting to see. I feel like I see this building behind you. We're in a building. Why is there a building in a building?
within the building?
Yeah.
The customs and excise, or nowadays you call them revenue and customs. It's our tax men.
Oh.
If you were to go back maybe 40, 50 years, there was a taxman on site at all times. And his job was to make sure that he knew every movement of alcohol, all the production, where the casks were, all that kind of thing. And so he would sit there with a ledger which told him which casks were going in and which were coming out. Now, strangely enough, today, not so much an issue. No one really cares.
Right.
I'm not saying they don't care, but they don't necessarily come and check the way they used to. But this is why bigger distilleries will use barcodes on their casks to make it easier to trace them.
Okay.
We haven't gone down that line, which is why this is, not just for show. This is genuinely how we identify each cask. The cask number of litres, when it was filled, and the year. So we have a record which says Stowe 1, Warehouse 1, cask numbers 58885 to 5889 are on the second row.
So I can only imagine that the revenuer was a really popular fellow around
Not
campus.
at all. There was no love for him.
Yeah.
He also had a lot to say in the still house because there's no allowance to take any of the spirit without paying the duty on it first. So the locks on the spirit safes in the still house were also his responsibility.
Okay. So as I stand here, Deborah, a couple of casks catch my eye.
Yes.
Right. So I see this one to your right,
Yes.
sort of all by itself. What's going on there?
So this one was filled on the 8th of June 2015, and that was the 150th anniversary to the day of our chairman, John Grant's great-great-grandfather buying Glenfarclas Distillery, so 1865. So he filled that cask to commemorate that anniversary.
All right. So, well, that's nice, right? And now I can see it now, 150 years to the day.
Yeah.
Right? Oh, all right. And then I see these 2 barrels to the left of me. One is very clear and one is very dark, but it's not a wooden head. It's a transparent head.
Yes.
So this closer one is very clear. What is that showing?
So it's literally just been filled. So this is a brand new cask of new make spirit, as we call it, because legally it's not whiskey until it's been in there for 3 years. So that's still new make spirit, and it is just to show the colour. So we'll leave that one there. The plan is to leave both of these here for the next 6 years, and we'll see how they evolve. And then in 6 years' time, maybe we'll get a new one.
So the one just past it is also a transparent head, but it's dark.
It's really dark. And believe it or not, it's a second fill sherry cask. We use our sherry casks up to 4 times, but the colour and impact on the whiskey is different each time.
Yeah.
And generally speaking, first fill gives the most colour, the most intense flavour, and then it gets down to something much more delicate by the time you get to a 4th fill. And it becomes a question of taste, whether you like first fill better than 4th fill. But for standard core range 12-year-old, for example, we'll have some first, some second, some third, some 4th. And that's an example of a 6-year-old second fill hogshead.
So a barrel that held sherry.
Yes.
Then held whiskey
once.
And is now holding whiskey. So it's its 3rd fill as a barrel. It's second fill with
Scotland,
whiskey, right? And it's been 6 years, and how much darker it's become. And again, only because of the wood.
Absolutely, yeah. So Glenfarclas, we never add colouring to our whiskey. It's one of our real bugbears. You know, you might notice that a lot of our bottles are dark glass, and that's because the other option was to add colouring. So you can either add colouring or you can make the glass dark so that you don't see if there's any difference, because batch sizes are not always very big.
Right.
So from batch to batch, you can get a little bit of difference in colour. If we've done our job, you shouldn't get difference in flavour, because the production manager, Colin, he's responsible for saying that the whiskey, when it leaves here for bottling, is entirely the same. The 12-year-old that we bottle next month will be the same as the one we bottled last year. But the colour can vary a tiny, tiny bit.
Well, I really appreciate that Glenfarclas is committed to the no color added, right? And I can tell you, as an end customer, as an end user, little differences through the batches is acceptable.
Yes.
Right, because
should be very much recognizable, but you can get tiny variations.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate that. When a barrel is done, when you've determined you're done with a barrel, what do you do?
So as I say, we use them up to 4 times, but not always 4. Sometimes a 4th fill cask is only 30 years old.
Right.
Sometimes after 1 fill, it's 70 years old.
Yeah.
So it will depend on the cask.
Yeah.
The guys, when they empty the cask, will take a look, and there's a kind of judgment happens. If it's a 3rd fill cask, does it still have another fill to give? And if it does, then we'll fill it again. If not, it goes in the pile, and the pile will then get used for all sorts of fun things, like smoking salmon or making garden furniture, or we actually sell staves in the visitor centre, and people sometimes buy them and then turn them into like candle holders and pieces of art, all to do with whiskey. I had a great one. I wish I could remember his name, because we could really give him a nice little plug here. A gentleman sent us an email and he said, my best friend loves Glenfarclas and I'm making his wedding ring. Would you send me a piece of wood from a Glenfarclas cask so I can use that to make his ring? And he did, and it's stunning.
That's awesome. We have some Glencairn holders back at my bar, the bitter end, to hold our glasses from staves.
So yes, exactly that. So some people come and make their own.
All right. Well, I'm loving this time in Warehouse One. I'm hoping we can stroll down the lane here and look at some barrels that I keep noticing. Do you mind if we head over there?
Absolutely, please do.
Okay, great. All right, Deborah. So we've come down. We're still in Warehouse One, a dunnage warehouse. As I was walking down the line there, I saw casks from the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, 2010 I can see, 1972, 1968, 1965, but I am drawn to 1953 and 1954. What's going on here?
So we're pretty lucky. We've got quite a large number still of older casks. That number is always falling. Don't get me wrong. You know, this is a finite game we play here.
You're not making more 1953?
Strangely enough, no, we are not. But we have a few casks left from 1953. Yeah. Those are our oldest casks left. Okay. So without going too much into the history, it was to do with rationing post-World War II.
Okay.
The production of whiskey really only got back into things
related
properly in
to grain and things
exactly
like that for food supply.
Exactly that, yes. So 53, 52 a little bit, but mostly 53 was when the whiskey industry really started properly up again post-World War II. Yeah. There were a few small exceptions. Yeah. A few things managed to sneak through, but they were very much the exception.
Yep. All right, so these are 1953, 1954. So familiar with the term gauging, re-gauging
Yeah.
a barrel. What does that mean?
So if they want to re-gauge the 1953, for example, which they will do regularly at this age,
Yep.
the danger is obviously when the angels are taking their share, those lovely angels are also taking some alcohol. So the alcohol level does drop as well as the volume, but not at the same rate. And the difference in rate will also vary if it's a sherry butt or if it's a hogshead. But the sherry butts generally will hold their strength really quite well, but that is still more than 70 years old. So that cask there is going to be a little under 42% ABV, but we'll be keeping a close eye. And that means every maybe 6 months or 9 months, they'll come along, they'll take a sample from the cask, they'll measure the strength by the temperature and the gravity, and then they can calculate what the exact alcohol content is, and also the level. But I mean, I think with the number of people that come into this warehouse, we would notice if it were leaking.
Right. So they're paying attention to volume and ABV.
Exactly.
Who gets to make the decision, if you can tell me, who gets to make the decision that it's ready for bottling at this ABV, at this volume?
So our managing director is actually the person who has the overview of how many casks we've got in our warehouses from all the different years. So when we do special bottlings for customers, he's the one who says, yep, there's enough of that particular year, 1997, for example, to do 3,000 bottles specifically for Germany, for example. So we do that kind of thing quite regularly. So he's the one who decides that. When it comes to things like this, we're almost playing a game here. How long can we keep it? Because it has got to the point that we are now over 70 years old. There will be a 70-year-old Glenfarclas at some point. And if we can get that one to hold on long enough, maybe there'll even be a 75.
Well, I'll leave you my mailing address before we leave campus here today. So speaking of making that decision and time to take it from the barrel, I haven't noticed a bottling facility on property here.
No.
If I missed it, or?
You have not missed it, no.
Okay.
It's pretty uncommon for distilleries to bottle their own whiskey. The kind of technique and staffing and everything else involved in bottling is quite different to what we actually do on site. Instead, the whiskey goes down to near Edinburgh. So our whiskey's bottled at Broxburn Bottlers, which is an independent bottling site down there. But one of the main shareholders is our chairman. So we are very much involved with Broxburn. So they're bottling it for us.
Convenient.
Very convenient. But in terms of practicality, 99.9% of the whiskey will go further south again than Edinburgh. So if we were to bottle it up here, all of the material would have to come up here to bottle it for it all to then go back down again. So it's definitely better for the carbon footprint that we do it down there. So the whiskey goes by tanker.
Okay. All right. And do you... or if it were something like this, would it just send a barrel down?
Yes. So if it's a single cask, which we do bottle for customers at different times, the cask will physically go down to Broxburn, and they will do the last checks. So let's say we take that one and we decide we're bottling it. They will do the gauging, so they'll have an estimate that if there was 111 UK gallons, not the same thing as US gallons, went into that one in 1953, there are still maybe 115 litres by our estimate left in there, maybe 130. And the strength when it leaves here is 41.8% ABV. That will all be redone in Edinburgh because filtering and everything will reduce the volume just a little bit because although there's no chill filtering, it will be going through standard filters because there will be sediment and so on, exactly. And then our friends down at Broxburn will tell us, okay, final outturn was 175 bottles and the final strength was 41.7% ABV, for example. A lot of skill involved.
I would feel like if that barrel was headed down, I would want to be in the truck with it, or certainly
making sure that nothing happened. Right? There's a little bit of value sitting behind us here, just a little bit.
Just like when the construction vehicles have to move the big machinery, a car in front, a car behind, to make sure it gets to the destination.
I mean, look at how we get the stills delivered when those get replaced as well.
Yes. All right, so warehouse one, loaded with barrels. You have lots of these warehouses on property.
But the other thing to remember is we are under His Majesty's revenue and customs here, so we can't take anything out of these casks to drink it. That has to be duty paid before you can do that.
We'd have to be in a duty paid warehouse.
Exactly.
Not a duty free.
Duty free, exactly.
Right, so we're in a duty free warehouse. We are, yes. Right, so there have not been taxes paid on
Nothing here has had any tax. The taxes are only paid once it's bottled.
Okay.
So luckily the government don't get the angel share.
They should just have to get their share of that.
Absolutely.
Right? And then everybody else gets the whiskey share. So we've seen a lot of the Glenfarclas operation today, and we're very thankful for your generosity with that. But I think it might be time to move into trying some of this whiskey.
I mean, it would be rude not to.
Well, so I think there's a tasting room we can go to.
There is very much so, yes, absolutely.
All right, so why don't we head up there?
Yes, let's. For the authentic stone noise as well, right?
Yeah.